In this section, I will look at the Backup and Restore utility included with Windows Server 2008. This utility not only allows you to back up your files, but also restore your server in the event of a hard disk crash. Windows Server Backup is a new utility shipped with Windows Server 2008. This utility replaces Windows NT Backup found in previous versions of Windows Server. If you have any old NT Backup files that you need to access, Microsoft has made NT Backup available for download from the Microsoft website. Bear in mind that NT Backup for Windows Server 2008 can only be used to read previous NT Backup files. You cannot use it to back up your data. If you are running Windows Server 2008, Windows Server Backup will back up volumes only. However, if you are running Windows Server 2008 Release 2, Microsoft has added support to backup folders and individual files. If you are upgrading from Windows Server 2003 to Windows Server 2008, make sure you are aware that tape drives are no longer supported. This does seem an unusual move from Microsoft, but support has been added to backup to hard disk, USB, optical, and network. One trend that has been increasing in the workplace is backing up to disk. Tape drives have seen less favor in the modern workplace with the cost of hard disks decreasing. In the office here, our backups are done to hard disk and another backup is done to optical. When we last looked at upgrading our systems, we looked at the price of tape drives and tape media. We found it was cheaper to back up our data to optical. With Windows Server Backup, if you use a hard disk and you are using Windows Server 2008, the hard disk is reformatted for use solely with Windows Server Backup. Once the drive is formatted, it will no longer appear in Windows Explorer with a drive letter. If you are using Windows Server 2008 Release 2, and if you back up to a hard disk, the hard disk will not be reformatted, and instead the backup will be stored in a folder. This hard disk could be removed later or even swapped out with another hard disk. Some companies back up their data only to hard disk, and the hard disks are taken off-site for storage like tapes were previously. With the speed of networks today, some computers simply back up their data over the network to another site. Regardless of which solution you use in your company, know that there are more alternatives to tapes than ever before, and this does affect the decisions by companies on how to back up their data. Windows Server Backup also supports Complete PC Restore, which is a bare metal recovery system. Bare metal means you can recover your system to another computer with completely different hardware. Lastly, Windows Server Backup has excellent incremental backup support. You no longer have to decide whether to perform a full backup and when to perform an incremental backup. Windows Server Backup is block-based, which means it looks at what parts of the file have changed and backs that up. Because of this, block backups work best when the hard disk has been defragged before the backup is first run. The first backup will always be the longest since everything needs to be copied. The backups following are very fast. Depending on how often your data changes, you may be able to back up your server several times a day. Let's have a look at how to install Windows Server Backup. To install Windows Server Backup, first of all, open Server Manager. Windows Server Backup is a feature of Windows Server. To install it, select Features from the left-hand side and then select Add Feature from the right-hand side. Towards the bottom of the list of features, you will see Windows Server Backup Features. Also notice that option below the command line tools. If you want to run backups from the command line or from scripts, you will need to ensure command line tool is also selected. Once you press Install, Windows Server Backup will install. The install is quite fast and, depending on the speed of your computer, may be completed in less than 30 seconds. Once installed, to run Windows Server Backup, open the Start menu and select Windows Server Backup under Administrative Tools. You will notice at the top of the screen a warning telling you that no backup has been performed on this computer as yet. You can either use the Scheduled Backup function or press the Backup Once button. Since I would like a backup to be performed now, I will press the Backup Once button. You will notice that the Scheduled Backup option is grayed out. If I had set up a scheduled backup, I could use this option. Even if I had configured options already in a scheduled backup, I could select the second option to use different options for the backup. On the next screen, I have the option to back up the full server or perform a custom backup. If you want to ensure all your data and operating system files are backed up, select the first option. In this case, I will select Custom so you can see all the different options. If you were running Windows Server 2008, this screen would be different. On Windows Server 2008, you can only select and deselect which volumes you want to back up on this screen. Since this computer is running Windows Server 2008 Release 2, I can select the option Add Items and choose which items I want to back up. To ensure you can restore your system even on different hardware, make sure you have all the options ticked. In this case, I can leave Volume D unticked because this hard disk will only contain backups and will not contain any data. Notice also if I expand the C drive, I can individually tick and untick folders and files that I want to back up. This feature is only available in Windows Server 2008 Release 2. Once I have decided on the options for the backup, I can move on to the next screen and determine where the backup will be stored. If I wanted to store the backup on a remote share, I could select the second option. Companies that are connected by high-speed links often store backup at other offices. This protects the company from data loss if the server is lost in a fire or other disaster. In this example, I will select the first option since I want to back up to a hard disk. Notice also you could back up to an optical if you wished. On the next screen, I need to decide where to store the backup. In this case, I will select D drive. If you are using Windows Server 2008 and not Windows Server 2008 Release 2, make sure you are aware that Windows Server 2008 will format the drive before the backup is started. You will lose all data on that hard disk, and the hard disk will not be available in Windows Explorer. With Windows Server 2008 Release 2, the hard disk will not be formatted, and the data will be stored in a folder on the hard disk. Now that I have finished the wizard, all I need to do is press Backup to start the backup. If I press Close, the backup will still run in the background. Windows Server Backup, if set up correctly, can run completely in the background with no user interaction. This backup does take a while to run, so I will pause the video and unpause it when it is finished. Now that the backup is completed, let's open Windows Explorer and have a look at what files were created by the backup process. On the D drive, you can see a folder called Windows Image Backup, which contains a folder called App1, which is the name of our server. In the folder Catalog, Windows keeps an index of all the files and backups that have been created on this server. You need this catalog file to restore files, but if you were to lose the catalog file, you can recreate it from the backup files themselves. Moving back a directory, you can see a directory which contains the backup that I just performed. Right down at the bottom of the screen, you can see a virtual hard disk file which contains all the files for the backup. The file can be read by other software, not just Windows Server Backup, and can even be used in a virtual machine. If you are running Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008 Release 2, this file can be mounted in the operating system using disk management. If I now close Windows Explorer and go back into Windows Server Backup, let's have a look at how to create a backup schedule. To create a backup schedule, select Backup Schedule from the right-hand side. This will take you into the Backup Schedule wizard. Once you are past the welcome screen, we get the same options as before. I can do a full backup or a custom backup. Since I performed a custom backup the last time, this time I will accept the defaults and do a full server backup. On this screen, I can select when the backup will run, and if I wish, I can select multiple times during the day to run the backup. Remember, Windows Server Backup is block-based, so it is quite fast at performing backups, assuming there are not too many changes on the hard drive. For this reason, you may want to consider performing more backups than you would normally using more traditional backup software. On this screen, you can select where to store the backup. The first option will use a dedicated hard disk for the backup and will reformat it just for the use of backups. The second option will back up to a folder, which is the same type of backup I performed when I selected Backup Once. The last option will back up to a network folder. Backing up to a network folder will be slower than using a local hard disk. However, for disaster recovery reasons, it is a good idea to keep a copy of your data at a remote location. Keep in mind that when backing up to a network folder, each backup that you perform will replace the last one. This means that you can only restore files from the day and time the last backup was run. You can't, for example, run the backup every day and pick and choose which day you want to restore from. In this particular case, I will select the option Backup a Volume so I can store the backup in the same location as the previous backup. Notice that when I press the Add button, I can only add hard disk volumes. I cannot add devices such as a DVD burner. Windows Server Backup does not support scheduled backups to optical media. Notice that when I go to add my existing hard disk, I receive an error message saying that this hard disk is part of the backup. When I selected Full Server Backup, all hard disks on the server were selected, including the hard disk that I was using to store my backups. That's pretty much it. Now all I need to do is finish the wizard and the backup schedule will be created. The next thing I will look at is how to recover files using Windows Server Backup. To do this, select Recover from the right-hand side, which will launch the Recovery Wizard. On the first screen of the Recovery Wizard, you need to select where the backup is stored. In this particular case, the backup is stored on the local computer. On the next screen, you can select which backup you want to recover from. In this case, I only have one backup, so I will move on to the next screen. On this screen, you can determine what you want to restore. You can restore the whole volume, the system state, or a particular file or folder. If you have an application installed on the server which supports Windows Server Backup, that application can register itself with Windows Server Backup. If this is the case, you can use Windows Server Backup to restore that application. In this particular case, I only want to restore some files, so I will select the default option. On the next screen, I can decide what files or folders I want to restore. For this example, I will restore the administrator's profile. On this screen, I can decide where I want to restore the files to. I can restore the files back to their original location, but in this case, I will choose a different location so I can have a look at the files before I overwrite any existing files. Next, I can decide what to do if the file that I'm restoring already exists. The first option will create a duplicate of any restored files that already exist, so you have the old file and the restored file. The next option will overwrite any existing files that Windows Server Backup finds. The last option, Do Not Overwrite Any Files, is useful when you delete a couple of files in a directory which may contain thousands of files and you are not sure which ones you deleted. The last option is used to recover the Ntfs permission set on the file. In most cases, you will want to do this, especially if you are restoring the files back to their original location. Once I press the Recover button, Windows Server Backup will start recovering the files. I have not selected too many files, so it will not take long for the recovery job to complete. This concludes Windows Server Backup. Remember that when you back up servers in your organization, you should first create a backup plan and schedule. This should include when you run your backups and also when you rotate your backup media. Your backup rotation should include sending your backup files off-site or at least placing your backup media in a fireproof safe. Once you have your backup plan running, make sure that you test your backups. You don't want to find out that you have a problem with your backup media on the same day that you have a catastrophic data loss. Also make sure that important data is stored on the server and not on the local user's hard disks. You can make it easier for your users by redirecting locations like their Documents folder to a folder on your file server. In short, having a good backup strategy will not only give you good peace of mind, but also good job security.